Kingston City School District. I'd like to welcome all of you to the Kingston City School District and to Miller Middle School.
Turn up the mic.
I'll start over. My name is Dr. Paul Paolino. I'm the Superintendent of Schools here at the Kingston City School District, and I'd like to welcome all of you to the Kingston City School District and to Miller Middle School for tonight's debate between our two congressional candidates, Mr. Gibson and Mr. Julian Schreibman. The Kingston City School District greatly appreciates the opportunity to host this important event. It's through our continued great working relationship with our local businesses and our partners in the Regional Chamber of Commerce that we're able to collaborate and provide important public events like this to our community. Now, to not waste any more of your time, I would like to introduce our moderator, President of the Regional Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Ward Todd.
Begin by asking you to stand and pledge to the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We were wondering if to begin with, Congressman Hinchy had shown up tonight. Is Maurice here tonight? Yes. Was. Let me know if he does. We at the very least want to thank him for his years of service to our region, not only in Congress.
Please speak directly into the microphone.
I'd be glad. Thank you very much. I welcome everyone here to our congressional debate here in Ulster County, and we are just absolutely delighted to see such a great turnout and an enthusiastic turnout. Our candidates, Congressman Chris Gibson, the Republican candidate, Julian Schreibman, the Democratic candidate. This is the new 19th district, and there are district maps outside if you didn't see it yet. This district includes all of Ulster, Sullivan, Columbia, Delaware, Schoharie, and Otsego counties, as well as portions of Dutchess, Rensselaer, and Montgomery counties, and the town of Sanford and Broome County. It's a huge district. Tonight's event is being, did I not say green? No. Green County, I apologize. Blame on the script writer. So we're delighted, the Ulster County Regional Chamber of Commerce, delighted to be part of this event as our co-host, your co-host tonight. We are involved in our debate tonight because it is our core mission to help educate and inform voters. We do not endorse candidates, but rather we conduct equal candidates. So the point I was making, this Chamber of Commerce does not endorse candidates, but we rather conduct meet the candidates' forums and debates each year. And that allows our members and the public a chance to see, hear, and question the candidates for office. October 23rd is our next monthly breakfast meeting. The Chamber will be featuring candidates for the New York State Senate. There are 4 districts now that comprise part of Ulster County. We invite you to come to that. Call the Chamber office to register. We'd love to see you. Our other co-hosts tonight, we are delighted to be working with the League of Women Voters of the Mid-Hudson region and the League of Women Voters of Saugerties. The League of Women Voters of the Mid-Hudson region is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government. The League is tonight represented by Cindy Bell, Derek Thompson, Sally Coldclaw, and Don Bell. Again, we thank you for the great work you do. Outside on the tables, if you did not get one on the way in, there are voters' guide pamphlets from the League and voter registration forms. This Friday is the deadline. If you did not yet register to vote, you have until Friday. And the Board of Elections here in Ulster County has special hours on Saturday as well. So let me begin by just going through some of the ground rules that both candidates have agreed on tonight. First of all, we ask you to please be quiet and respectful while the candidates speak. And in order not to lose precious time, please hold all your applause until the conclusion of the event. There can be no recording of tonight's event, audio or video, with the exception of authorized members of the media. No political signs inside this building. Each candidate will begin by delivering a 3-minute opening statement. Earlier, we determined who was going to go first based on a coin flip backstage. Mr. Schreibman won that flip and will be going first. After the opening statements, we will focus on questions from you, the audience. Candidates will have 2 minutes to answer questions and 1 minute to rebut if they so choose. Questions are to be submitted on index cards. They'll be collected by the League of Women Voters, and I will read the questions in alternating order. You're reminded that all questions are to be about the issues in this campaign only. All questions must be ones both candidates can answer. There will be no statements, no personal remarks. Please write legibly on these cards. If the question is too lengthy, we will paraphrase for clarity. Candidate speaking time will be strictly enforced out of respect for the other candidate and also for your audience. And a final reminder before we begin our introduce our candidates tonight. As soon as tonight's debate is concluded, please be sure to turn your cell phones back on. Please, don't forget. Then you can make and receive all the calls and text messages after the debate is over. Each candidate has given us a brief bio, which I will read first before we introduce them to speak. Julian Schreibman grew up in Ulster County and is a product of the Kingston school system, including M. Clifford Miller. His mother, Ann Hebard, has operated her ballet school in Kingston for nearly 40 years. Julian graduated from Yale and Yale Law School. As Assistant General Counsel of the CIA, he helped prosecute 4 al-Qaeda terrorists in the case United States versus Osama bin Laden. Julian worked as a federal prosecutor and as the senior assistant district attorney in Ulster County, making our communities safer. He lives in Stone Ridge with his wife Shannon and their 3 young boys. Chris Gibson grew up in Columbia County, the son of a union man. Chris graduated from Ichabod Crane High School. After enlisting in the National Guard, he graduated from Siena College. There he enrolled in the ROTC program and was commissioned in the Army upon graduation. Chris rose to the rank of colonel and deployed 7 times, including 4 combat tours in Iraq. He taught cadets at West Point and received a PhD in government from Cornell. 2 years ago, he ran for Congress, winning that race by over 10 points. Chris, his wife Mary Jo, and their 3 kids live around the corner from where he grew up in Kinderhook in Columbia County, and where his mom still lives today. We'll begin our opening statements with Julian Schreibman. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Ward. Thank you, Congressman Gibson, Congressman Hinchy. Thank you to the Chamber of Commerce and the League of Women Voters for giving us this wonderful forum. And thank you also for giving me the opportunity to be back on stage at Miller Junior High School. It's been about 25 years since those band concerts. It brings back a lot of memories to me to be here on the stage tonight. When I was a student here in the mid-1980s, we were across the street from a booming IBM plant. Most of my friends' parents worked there, and year after year, those families moved away, until by the time I graduated from high school, the plant was on the verge of closing. And although we have some great things going on there now, the fact is, for years afterward, it seemed as if the only thing we did was change the name of the road from Neighborhood Road to Enterprise Drive, with exactly the results you'd expect if all you did is change the name of a road. Now, Congressman Gibson was sent to Washington with a promise to focus on jobs and the economy. But his record there is essentially one of changing names of roads. Instead of focusing on jobs and the economy, he's made his priority ending the guarantee of Medicare and turning it into a voucher program, defunding Planned Parenthood and restricting women's choice, and curtailing educational opportunity by cutting Pell Grants and Head Start. I offer a very different vision, because that is not the vision of our upstate New York voters. This is where I grew up. My dad was raised during the Depression, didn't finish 9th grade, joined the Army and served in World War II. My mom is an immigrant. It was her small business that supported my family growing up. And as Ward told you, she's a ballet teacher, which is wonderful, except that ballet plus rural New York does not lead to an early retirement. The fact is, we struggled. We struggled month to month and year to year to pay the bills. But I still was given the chance to be the first in my family to go to college, thanks to a Pell Grant, thanks to borrowing the maximum student loans I was allowed to borrow, working year-round at school, and coming home in the summer getting whatever job I could, including bagging groceries just down the street from here at Wall Balance. And because of being given that educational opportunity, I've been able to spend my career in public service. As attorney at the Central Intelligence Agency, I worked on that case, United States versus Osama bin Laden, the prosecution of 4 members of Al-Qaeda for bombing our embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. Became a prosecutor myself, including right here in Ulster County, helping to make our community safer from drug trafficking, domestic violence, and child abuse. And I'm blessed now to be raising my own 3 little boys with my wife Shannon, just a few miles from the house where I grew up and where my mom still lives. I'm running for Congress because I've had the opportunity to live the American dream, and I've also lived the life of middle-class struggles, lived the life of recognizing what an opportunity and difference education makes. Our middle-class voices are not being heard in Washington. They're being drowned out by the special interest, the big corporations, the powerful. I am running to give a voice to those middle-class families because we need to do more than just change the names of streets in Washington. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Ward, and also to the Chamber and the League of Women Voters, and also thank Julian for being here tonight. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm very excited to be here in Ulster County to see so many friends. I'm Chris Gibson, an Army veteran serving in the Congress, and I'm here tonight to tell you why I'm running for re-election. I grew up in a working class family in Kinderhook, and that's in Columbia County, not very far from here. Bob and Barbara Gibson, my parents, my dad was a mechanic for Otis Elevator. He was part of the union. Mom stayed at home. She raised myself and my 3 siblings. We didn't have a lot of money, but we did have love and discipline and a firm belief in the American dream. At the age of 17, I enlisted in the New York Army National Guard as a private in the infantry to protect our cherished way of life. I was the first one in our family to go to college. I went to Siena where I studied history and I made the transition from enlisted man to officer in the ROTC program. After graduating, I went in the Army, and I spent 24 years, rising to the rank of colonel, ultimately commanding at the brigade combat team level and serving multiple combat tours, leading paratroopers. And I just want to say that for Ulster County, you can be incredibly proud of your sons and daughters. They have served honorably with skill and with great courage and sacrifice over the last decade. I'm honored to have soldiered with them. You know, we help bring people together in Iraq. Those are skills that are helping me now in the United States Congress. Other experiences I had in the Army that helped me in the Congress is I taught American government at the United States Military Academy, first going by way of Cornell, where ultimately I earned a PhD in government. A couple of years ago, I retired from the Army to run for Congress, to unite our country, to grow our economy, and to create jobs. And so Mary Jo and I and our 3 kids, we moved back home to Kinderhook. We live around the corner from where I grew up, where Mom still lives, and our kids go to the same public school that I went to. And I'm still focused on serving others. I've term limited myself for my time in the Congress, and I give my pension back to the Treasury. And I'm focused on serving everyone, from Occupy Wall Street to Tea Party, and everyone in between. The Washington Post ranks me as the 3rd most independent Republican in the Congress. And the National Journal ranked my 2011 voting record at the center of the House. And that's because I focus on constituent services and local issues. Like with the storm after Hurricanes Irene and Lee, I teamed up with Peter Welch, a Democrat from Vermont, and we ensured that we got the appropriations necessary so that we could make our way back, and we are indeed on our way. And like with broadband, when I reversed a decision that our leadership made to zero out the low-interest loan program, I brought an amendment to the floor of the House, and it had 90 Republicans and 131 Democrats that voted for it, and it became law. And now I'm working with local officials to expand out broadband. And on Lyme disease, a horrific public health scourge in our area. And I have helped to get money for research and development. I'm honored to be here to talk about my record and to address the false attacks that have been rendered against me. God bless.
Respectfully asking, hold all applause to the very, very end. We have a limited, finite amount of time tonight. We'd love to get both of the candidates to answer all of the questions. So appreciate your cooperation with that. We move into the question and answer. We'll do them alternating. We have 2 minutes for each response and a 1 minute rebuttal if the candidate so chooses. And the first question will be answered first by Congressman Gibson. And it says we have always had a strong relationship with Israel. How do you see our relationship with Israel going forward and our involvement in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Well, first of all, let me say this is very personal for me. As a young man at the age of 26, I was in the sands of Saudi Arabia. And then when Desert Storm kicked off, I was sent north with the rest of the formations. And, at that moment, we had Scuds flying in every direction. And I learned through the evening update that those Scuds were also hitting Israel. And as a student of history, I thought, oh my goodness, and sometimes it's easy to forget now, but the Soviet Union was still an empire. And it was a very serious threat that this operation in Iraq could very well spin off into a regional war, and maybe even a world war. And our country asked Israel to do something that it's very difficult for any one country to do to another. We asked them not to respond. And when they didn't respond, that's something I will never forget. Israel is a dear friend of ours. They share our values, our democracies, our democratic approaches, and we must be there always for our friends. They were there for us in those tough times. And so now, as we go forward, it's vitally important, particularly in a tough period, when we're looking at the specter of a possible nuclear-armed Iran. I have voted to ensure that that does not happen. We cannot have a situation with deterrence with Iran. At the same time, war is in no one's interest. It's not in Iran's interest, it's not in Israel's interest, and it's certainly not in our interest. And so we need the very best diplomacy right now, that we need to be united with all of our friends and allies around the world so that these sanctions shall work. And even though it's tough to imagine a lasting peace with Palestine, we must move forward. And I believe that Israel's committed to doing that too. And so together we go forward, imagining a day without war and working towards that end.
Israel is one of our most important and long-cherished allies, and the security and stability in the Middle East is based upon Israel's security and its peace in that region. We have seen in the Middle East over the past many decades the dangers of instability, the dangers of escalation of combat, the dangers of mistaking and oversimplifying disputes there. So one thing that has been constant is our strong relationship with Israel, which has been a beacon of democracy in that region and an anchor for democratic growth and economic growth in the region. An Iran armed with nuclear weapons is unacceptable, and we must use all measures and appropriate steps to ensure that Iran does not destabilize the Middle East and threaten the security and stability of that region. That means starting first and foremost with diplomacy. It means using targeted sanctions as appropriate, as have been working in the recent past to slowly change the direction of that government, and leaving all options on the table to ensure that Iran understands that it cannot be a unilateral force for instability and aggression in that region. The United States has a strong record of standing with its allies, and that's what we need to do when it comes to Israel and our democratic friends in the Middle East.
Each candidate can have up to 1 minute for rebuttal. Congressman Gibson.
Well, I think we largely agree on this. Let me just make a couple other points, and I'm happy to hear that because you know what, that's the key thing in our democracy. I think too often we focus on our differences. You know, if we have 20 issues and we disagree on 12, let's work on the 8 we agree upon. It's a country that has so much more in common than we ever had apart. You know, a couple other points that, you know, we have an agreement with Israel. We give them up to $3 billion a year in aid. It is important. It's really important for their defense. We do Iron Dome with them, with Arrow. 70% of it is actually spent here in the United States of America. It's also important when you think of the situation, like, for example, in Egypt. Very concerning at this point. And as we go forward with Egypt, and I was on training exercise with Egyptian paratroopers, I know that they cherish their relationship with us, but any kind of continued aid to Egypt, they need to honor their peace agreement with Israel so we don't destabilize the region. Thank you.
And I'll agree with the Congressman that it is good for us as we start this debate to start on a basis where we can find agreement across the aisle. In my time at the CIA, I was able to see folks of all different political persuasions working together to ensure that we were doing together what was in the best interest of the national security of the United States. And important for us, I know there are going to be some very sharp differences and sharp disagreements tonight when it comes to policy. And so always important to come back to those anchors where we can find areas of agreement. It's always been said that politics should stop at the water's edge. And sadly, that hasn't always been true. But I'm very glad that the Congressman and I can agree on this critically important issue to our own future and the stability and future of our own country.
Thank you. Next question will begin with Mr. Schreibman. In what global situation, if any, would you support the U.S. going to war?
In what local situation?
Yes, global.
Global, excuse me. You know, I think that it is absolutely important to state first and foremost that war is always the last option. My father and all of his brothers, my mother's brother, all fought throughout World War II. We know that there are incredible dangers and crises that we face as a country. But the first principle is to understand that answering with war has tremendous, tremendous costs. We have with us tonight Congressman Maurice Hinchey, who bravely stood up and said no to war in Iraq. To recognize that when you oversimplify issues and speak in terms of black and white and of absolutes, you run the risk of ratcheting up emotions, of ensuring that divisions endure rather than resolve, ensuring that disagreements are made more permanent rather than looking for the kind of commonalities and agreements that the Congressman and I have found when talking about issues of foreign policy tonight. So obviously, any circumstance which threatens the United States national security is critically important. But we must recognize that we have the most incredible and strong armed forces in the world, that our nation is strong and impregnable. We here have incredible national defenses. And so when we look abroad to see the threats that occur, we must always remember that position of strength and ensure that we remember, as I know our president does, and so many people with that terrible responsibility of deciding whether to put our young men and women at risk, that is the most powerful and consequential decision that can be made to say that our young people will be put at risk of shedding their blood. And they volunteer and sign up willingly to serve. They serve our country greatly. And it is absolutely critical that we ensure that their mission is always a necessary mission and one in the interest of the national security of the United States.
Mr. Gibson.
Well, I guess I want to begin by saying that I want us to imagine peace. I want us to think differently. And then I want us to, and I'm in the process of doing this down in the Congress. I've had some amendments to do this, but then reforming our national security establishment. Because, you know, once we think differently and we don't continue to try to be the world's policeman, there's so many reforms that we can undertake that will end up with the world's strongest military in the world as a deterrent, but not engaged in foreign excursions all over the globe, imagining peace. Let me just say that with Iraq, you know, we're done now. After a decade, it was especially difficult. I was there when it was hard and unpopular. I'm thanking God today that our troops are home from there. And you know, when candidate Obama was running, when he was talking about it, I was still in the Army. And I'll tell you candidly, I was worried. I was concerned about what he was saying because it didn't seem to make sense to me. He was going to take a brigade out a month. But you know what? He went into office and he listened and he studied the issue and he learned from it. And I supported him and what he did there. We came out of Iraq having achieved limited objectives. I support him now in Afghanistan. It's very difficult. He certainly didn't score any political points for surging in Afghanistan, but it was the right call because he envisions a time when we can reposition all our forces back here, and then Afghanistan will be able to take care of its own security, and we'll establish the relationships that will allow us to ensure that any safe haven that arises, that we're going to be able to deal with our Special Operations Command. And so, let me just say, just very quickly, in terms of the kind of national security establishment reform, first of all, we've got ground forces that are all over the world. We've got 80,000 troops in Europe. All these years after the Second World War, they need to come back home. You know, when we went into NATO, the NATO countries said they were going to spend 2% of their GDP on defense, and they've never done that. They've never done that. They've been free riding off us, and we should really reposition those forces. And also, we've got commands. We've got 4-star level commands all over the world that they should be consolidated as well. If we think differently, and if we integrate better our intelligence with operations, we will be more effective against Al-Qaeda, especially when we work with friends and allies. But we'll also be in a position to be safer for less money, which will allow us to put investments into education and infrastructure and broadband and against Lyme disease. So this is the future that I imagine.
Okay, rebuttal? 1 minute.
You know, again, I think that the Congressman and I find a lot of agreement on these issues beyond the water's edge. That, to me, it is critically important that we look to find ways to redeploy and bring those troops home, and absolutely invest the dividend of that in ensuring that our country has the opportunity to grow and thrive. Unfortunately, the Congressman's record on the types of investments he's just said he's interested in is not a strong one. But we will be getting those questions, I'm sure, as the debate goes by. The important thing is that we agree that it is time to re-examine our commitments and ensure that we are shouldering only a fair burden of our commitments to the peace and stability of the world.
1 minute for rebuttal.
Well, when you look at my record, there's been about close to 1,500 votes. You'll find that my record is strong on issues of education, on infrastructure, on broadband, and Lyme disease. You know, when you look at all those votes and you point to a budget vote from 2011 and say that's the end of the story, those are concepts that we use to try to get back to a balanced budget over time. We have authorizing bills that come later, and then appropriations bills where we make individual judgments on these matters. And you will see that I have a strong record on them. With regard to our agreement here, I'm certainly very pleased to hear that. So let me just conclude by saying I'm enormously proud of our servicemen and women. They have sacrificed for us and really just doing what we asked them to do, and they have served us with great skill and pride.
Thank you. Our next question, we will start with Congressman Gibson. A response: I am 41 years old and I am not convinced that Medicare will be around by the time that I retire. How will you ensure that myself and other young Americans have access to Medicare in the future? Congressman Gibson.
Well, it will be there. Let me just state that right up front. We're in a political season. There's all kinds of ads flying everywhere. I just want to assure everyone, this program will be saved, and it will be strengthened going forward. I have voted for 2 concepts. One last year, that was a premium support that looked at ages 54 and younger and had an expansion of what's already being used right now in Medicare Advantage. This is where individuals choose from among federally regulated and federally guaranteed programs. And it's guaranteed coverage. So, you know, the notion that my opponent says that $6,400 cost shift to seniors, look, the CBO has updated their figures on this. They say that's no longer so. So, you know, let's just, when you're in a political season like this, you know, I understand that there are campaigns that are waged, but I'm telling you right now that we can absolutely save this program. And what we're going to have to do is work together to do that. And so whether it be premium support, or whether it be the concept that I voted for this year in the bipartisan budget, which relies on accountable care framework, more competitive bidding for prescription drugs, and efforts on fraud, waste, and abuse. These are two concepts that can be expanded out, that we can gain some kind of traction on this so that we ensure, as the trustees have told us, you know, the trustees have told us if we do nothing, we're going to lose the program in about a decade. That would be so unacceptable and so un-American. We're not going to allow that to happen. I mean, I think about my mom. She's 75 and on the program. I hope she lives to be 100. She's counting on that program, and she's counting on us to get beyond the electoral politics and find a way to come together to make sure that we save this great program and strengthen it going forward, because after all, our 41-year-old friend is paying into it now and is counting on us to get this done.
Thank you. This is an issue on which there is an absolute difference and distinction between myself and Congressman Gibson. It's an issue that's tremendously important to our citizens around this district and to our families, and it's very personal to me. In 2004, my father was diagnosed with leukemia. In the 3 years that followed to the end of his life, Medicare was the source of stability and constancy, that he could go to the doctors that he needed, get the procedures he needed, and ensure that he was able to get that care. And with all the other stress, not live with the fear that his last days would impoverish my mother's last years. So Medicare is not just about the people who are on it now. It's about their family members. It's about the next generation. It's about the gentleman who wrote that card. I have lived the success of Medicare, and I will preserve and defend it. The Congressman's vision is completely different. You don't have to take my word for it. It's his voting record. He has voted to end the guaranteed coverage of Medicare and replace it with vouchers. He has voted to privatize Medicare, costing seniors thousands more, turning them back over to the health insurance companies that are funding his election campaigns, and voted to raise the eligibility age so that 41-year-old is paying into the program longer and has the benefits for less time. All to take money out of Medicare, this is what he voted for, to take money out of Medicare and give yet another budget-busting tax cut to millionaires and billionaires. That is the wrong priority for today's seniors, it's the wrong priorities for tomorrow's seniors. And they're not just a theoretical, this is what he has already voted to do.
1 minute rebuttal, Mr. Gibson.
Well, you know, listen, the nonpartisan fact checker organization, PolitiFact, called that the lie of the year. I mean, it's just, it's simply not true. And, you know, running ads, the Albany Times Union has called the ads that he's running deceptive. Look, under the concepts, I voted for two concepts to get the conversation started. We're going to have to come together to save the program. And under both concepts, you have to get the same amount of coverage as traditional Medicare. Keep in mind that we have individuals right now that are on Medicare Advantage that are already using this concept. We're talking about building out this concept because we're finding that enrollment is up and costs are down. You know, with regard to the eligibility age, I never voted to raise the eligibility age, ever. That's just flatly untrue. And the fact of the matter is we can't take money out of Medicare and start a new program. That's a problem. We have to work together to save the program.
1 minute.
First of all, Medicare Advantage is a good program for folks who are on it. It is not a cost-saving measure. The fact is, it costs the government more. As for taking money out of Medicare for a new program, the only person on this stage that's voted to take money out of Medicare is the congressman. And he took that money to give it for a tax break for millionaires and billionaires. Congressman talks about having a conversation starter. When you vote to end Medicare, you're not starting a conversation, you're ending a conversation. You're voting to end one of the most successful programs ever that makes a difference between seniors who struggled to find health care before Medicare, struggled to have insurance, paid too much for their insurance. So we established Medicare, and we made an extraordinary difference in our seniors' lives. That program can be strengthened and grown and be there for the next generation. But it won't be if it's privatized and turned back to the pre-Medicare days where seniors were struggling with health insurance companies and where the savings are sent just to give a new tax break to millionaires.
Thank you. Next question, we will start with Mr. Schreibman. And it is, do you think climate change is an important issue? And if so, what do you intend to do about it? 2 minutes.
You know, the folks around this district recognize the risk posed by climate change. We have an industry that depends on our winter sports. We have an industries that depend on tourism. And we have tremendous opportunities in this district to take a new direction when it comes to energy, something that the Congressman Hinchey has been a great leader on. We have in this district that was just yesterday at New York State Solar Farm, who within a year could be in a position to supply power to 3,000 homes in this region. We have a company out in Oneonta, Ioxis, that makes incredible high storage capacitors, made in America completely and exported to China for the energy of tomorrow. These are the great things that we have going on here. The congressman has a different priority for the future of energy in our region. His pet project, as it's been described, is to build a new nuclear power plant in upstate New York, a new nuclear power plant. At the same time, he has already voted to slash the Department of Energy safety program, including laying off 6,000 Department of Energy safety inspectors. That is not the future of energy in this country. It does nothing to address issues that affect us. We already have seen with the storms that have ravaged this region the dramatic impact of violent weather as promoted by the slow effect of climate change. So we need to come together in a bipartisan basis in Washington and deal with this problem and not have a conversation between folks who try to deal with the problem seriously and those who want to blame global warming on sunspots. The fact is, a serious problem requires a serious approach and a new direction for energy in this country, not building a new nuclear plant, but investing in the wonderful renewable industries that we have here in the Hudson Valley and the Catskills.
Mr. Gibson, 2 minutes.
Well, let me just start by once again reiterating, I never voted to end Medicare. You know, this was considered the lie of the year. I voted for two concepts to get the conversation started, to save Medicare from bankruptcy, and to protect it and strengthen it going forward. It was the CBO. The CBO said that $716 billion was taken from Medicare to pay for the 1.7 for the president's health care law. It didn't come from me, it came from the CBO. With regard to climate change, look, we've just gone through two 500-year storms in the last 5 years. There's something going on. And you know, I think we need to do more work along with New York City's DEP, town and county officials all throughout the watershed, 5 counties, 41 towns. There's got to be more work to prepare for these natural disasters and to really have more fairness for us here. Look, there's more that could have been done. Reservoirs could have been brought down, more silt removals, strengthening stream banks, because we can't have the kind of destruction that we witnessed last year. We lost people, we lost property, and some of that didn't need to happen. You know, with regard to clean and renewable energy, I have a very strong record. You know, I support that. I voted 9 times in the House to increase money for efficiencies and clean energy. And I voted 6 times to protect amendments that were trying to take money away from that account, to the point where, you know, some groups down in DC, they don't like my voting record on that. But we lead the nation when it comes to clean and renewable, and I'm proud to say that. I work with farmers to help them get grant applications for solar power. And let me just say on nuclear power, indeed, I looked into this. I looked into it quite extensively. And because of my term limits, and because of the fact that the number one issue really for us is transmission, over a year ago, I decided not to pursue it. Yet my opponent, he's bringing it up now because he's trying to score political points. It's clear that I'm not pursuing it any further. But I do believe that we need to work to drive down gas and home heating prices now, but also get less reliant going forward. And we're going to do that by being the country that perfects clean renewable.
1 minute rebuttal, Mr. Schreibman.
You know, once again, we're speaking here not about my spin or the Congressman's spin. We're speaking about facts and the Congressman's voting record. The Congressman voted as part of the Paul Ryan budget to take that $700 billion out of Medicare and use it for tax breaks for the millionaires and billionaires. That was his vote, not my vote. I wasn't there. He voted for that budget, and that's what it did. When it comes to the Congressman's record on energy, it is equally poor. Rather than focus on those renewables, he has voted to give billions of dollars of taxpayer subsidies to the big oil companies and voted to roll back more than 40 years of regulations of the EPA saying that they can only take into account the economic impact of the regulations. 40 years of bipartisan commitment to support for the EPA, he voted to change it. That is not the right direction, going backwards by decades. The right direction is not more taxpayer subsidies to big oil, not building a nuclear plant, which even after what happened in Japan, the Congressman was said to brush off concerns and say it was going to happen here. It's to invest in the incredible opportunities we have here in the Hudson Valley for renewables and green energy.
1 minute.
Well, first of all, again, the Medicare, the money was put back into Medicare. So I just, we just utterly disagree, and people can look up the record on that. With regard to energy, first let me say on nuclear power, we get 25% of our electricity right now from nuclear power. So again, I looked into that, and I decided it wasn't feasible in the time that I'm there. But I don't regret looking into things. This is what, I'm a lifelong learner, and I try to help people in every way I can. With regard to energy, I grew up in a working class family that was crushed by the rising gas and home heating prices. I'm trying to help now because I know I got constituents. They put their disposable income in the gas tank. It's not right. We can do better than this. We can drive down gas and home heating prices at the same time that we look to perfect clean and renewable energies. This is part of my frustration in Washington because it's supposed to be like shirts and skins. Democrats on one side, Republicans on the other, and you have to choose. I don't believe that. We can do both. This is a great country that can do both.
Thank you. The next question, we'll start with Congressman Gibson. Again, 2 minutes and a 1 minute rebuttal for each. And this question is, what does bipartisanship mean to both of you? Congressman Gibson.
Well, the first thing I think is stability. I think about the 1980s, and I think about President Reagan and Tip O'Neill, and they lived by the golden rule. They treated other people the way they wanted to be treated. And as Tip O'Neill said, I want to hate the son of a you-know-what. And he said, but I don't. I love him. And that's the thing that's missing right now. I would like to see our national leaders. This is, in the Army, units took on the attitude of the commander and the sergeant major. If our national leaders got along, that doesn't mean they have to agree on all issues. This is the beauty of America. We can disagree. But we should be able to disagree agreeably. That's where it starts. And then I think where it goes from there is careful consideration of all proposals. When I went through the budget process this spring, I read every budget. And I decided in the end that the bipartisan budget, Cooper-Latourette, was the best budget. Because you know what? It didn't spend $500 billion on defense that I didn't think we needed to spend. And it also had better provisions for middle class when it came to tax policy. And it was also the only budget that both Democrats and Republicans could vote for. And what's very disappointing is that the day of the vote, we looked like we were going to get over 100 votes for this bipartisan budget that was both pro-growth, it got more revenues by going through that tax reform. Because when you close loopholes, you lower rates, you're helping small business owners and working class families who spend 96% of what they take home. This is how we're going to get the revenues back. We lost $300 billion in revenues when we went into recession. So all the political talk about raising taxes, we've got to get those revenues back. And the way we get the revenues back is by getting America back to work. And it's also fiscally responsible. I thought we were going to get over 100 people, but unfortunately, the right and the left started burning up the phone lines. Grover Norquist saying you're breaking your tax budget. Left saying you can't do this. Look, I don't work for that guy. I work for 750,000 people up here, and I look at it and say it's pro-growth, it's the kind of tax reform that our people need, and so I voted for it. So that's where I think it ends. It starts with civility, and it ends in problem solving, bringing people together.
Mr. Schreibman.
Yes, I've had the opportunity to spend most of my career in non-partisan public service, where you don't see left or right, you don't see political enrollment. When you're in the world of national security, when you're in the world of law enforcement, you don't distinguish. And at the end of the day, that's what service in Congress requires as well. We're not red Americans, we're not blue Americans. We're all red, white, and blue Americans. And service in Congress requires that attitude and reaching across the aisle. The problem is the last 2 years, with the Tea Party class that's come into Congress, we've seen a complete breakdown of those efforts. You know, the budget that the congressman just says he voted for this year, instead of voting for the Tea Party budget he voted for the first time, was bipartisan only in the sense that it was rejected overwhelmingly by both parties, because it raised $2 trillion in taxes, putting the burden on the middle class, while drastically cutting Social Security. That wasn't the approach forward. The fact is, many efforts have been put forward over the years on a bipartisan basis, and that fell apart the last 2 years. Transportation bill, always passed bipartisan basis, nothing now. Here's one particular example very close to my heart, the Violence Against Women Act. This is a bipartisan bill that's been around for years. It was up for renewal, and Democrats came forward, and many Republicans said, well, let's just renew it as is. Congressman Gibson stood with the most extreme wing of his party and rejected that bipartisan renewal, instead voting for an extreme and narrow version that left out classes of women that I know as a prosecutor of domestic violence should not have been left out, should not have been excluded. So there has been these past 2 years that have produced the most obstruction and the least progress. And the fact is, no matter how many times he wants to say he'd prefer a bipartisan approach, it hasn't been the one the congressman has pursued. He's been right there, voting with his party time after time, voting with that Tea Party extremism and obstructionism time after time.
1 minute to vote, Congressman Gibson.
Well, let me start by saying that those are, certainly interesting words that you started with, but during your tenure as the chair of the Democratic Party here, you divided Democrats and you divided this county. And to the point where now Democrats in this county are supporting me, and I'm very thankful for it. The other thing is you're divisive language. You use language that divides people. You know, I treat everyone with dignity and respect. You know, Occupy Wall Street to Tea Party and everyone in between. I don't know how you're going to represent everyone when you divide us. Whether it's 47% or Tea Party, or by socioeconomic class, it's not building teams. It's not bringing people together. You have grossly mischaracterized Simpson Bowles. It really concerns me. And more specifically, the Cooper-Latourette bipartisan budget, which may be the only vehicle that gets us away from the fiscal cliff. In the transportation bill, I was a force to bring it together. I made sure we put the transit piece back in. And we actually got that, I'll tell you what, we got that done. That's 2 years and 3 months. It's better than 3 months. It's a bill that's good for New York. It's good for our country. And I'll tell you, I'm proud to have supported it. It's going to help our contractors. It's going to help our hardworking building trades get back to work. I'm so incredibly proud to have their endorsement as the son of a union man. And I'll tell you, you talk about the violence against women. I voted for that bill because that's what my district, they want us to have those protections. And we can fix it in conference.
1 minute to vote, Mr. Schreibman.
You know, as I spoke about at the beginning, I'm running for Congress because of my experience growing up in a struggling middle-class family. As someone with that experience, with the kids that I grew up with the families that I grew up with the people I saw struggling, the people I saw hurting when I was a prosecutor helping them, I believe that the empathy and the experience I've had will serve me very well to be a bipartisan healer in Washington. Now, the congressman brings up the 47% as if this is something I said. We all know who said that. Mitt Romney. He said that 47% think they're entitled to food and shelter, see a doctor when they're sick. He said he's not concerned about them. It's not his job. That's a dark and terrible vision for America. That's not the America that carved in granite on the base of the Statue of Liberty. Give me, you're tired, you're poor, you're hungry. It's not just the vision that Romney wants to put in place, though. It's the vision that Congressman Gibson's been voting for the last 2 years. And I'm sorry, Congressman Gibson, that it isn't just about our personalities and how we deal with people. I think you're a nice person. I hope I'm a nice person. But it comes down to priorities and voting record. And the voting record that you have has been divisive.
Okay, our next question for both candidates. This question has to do with jobs, and as our representative, what can you pledge to do to help create and retain jobs here in New York's Hudson Valley? We begin with Mr. Schreibman.
Ward, Congressman Gibson was elected on a pledge to focus on jobs and the economy, and he didn't follow through on that pledge. Instead, he took those votes that I've described to privatize Medicare, restrict a woman's right to choose, and cut off educational opportunity. I started off tonight talking about the IBM plant across the street. Those jobs didn't just evaporate. They're still being done. They're just not being done here. And unfortunately, the Congressman's voting record has continued to support the policies that let that happen all over America. He has continued to support policies that reward companies for shipping jobs overseas. Policies that, like giving billions of dollars in taxpayer subsidies to the biggest oil companies. This region isn't about giant oil companies. This region is about small business owners. Small business owners like my mom, small business owners like the ones I've had a chance to visit and speak with all across this district. We need policies that work for them. What does that mean? That means targeted tax relief so they can continue to add jobs. Small businesses are the engine here. They've created 2/3 of all the jobs in our economy the past several years. It also means relief from burdensome regulations. The fact is, Washington comes up with these one-size-fits-all ideas that just work for the big guys with the lobbyists that write them down there, and they don't fit our small businesses right, and they burden them, and we need to reform those as well. So we need to have a focus on our small businesses, on our farmers, and on our schools. Because let's remember as well that investing in education is investing in jobs. Congressman thinks the Department of Education is unnecessary. Voted to slash Head Start, voted to slash Pell Grants. That is not in our long-term economic interest. We know that our families here want to see our kids succeed here and build their families here and stay here.
2 minutes, Mr. Gibson.
Well, let me just start by saying that my point is that when you use divisive language, it's not the right departure point. Whether you're talking about Tea Party, or you're talking about socioeconomic class, you're talking about Occupy Wall Street, or you're talking about 47%. I don't speak in language like that because I don't think like that. I think of how do we bring people together, and that's my point there. And with regard to a voting record, look, we've had about 1,500 votes. I voted with Democrats about 400 times, close to it anyways. And that's because I don't look at the party, I look at the idea. And I say, is it constitutional, number one? And number two is it good for upstate New York, and is it good for our country? So for example, Head Start and Pell Grant, at the end of the year, I voted for, and I'm proud to say this, we increased Head Start by $400 million, and I visited Head Start all over this area, and Pell Grants as well. I mean, we've increased it now to $5,550, highest that it's ever been. You mentioned small business. I'm proud to have the endorsement of the National Federation of Independent Businesses. And let me say this, I'm encouraged by the data that you saw this past week. We went from 10% unemployment down to 7.8. We've got so much further to go, but we're moving in the right direction. Don't believe all the negative news you hear on the news today. Democrats and Republicans are working together, not at the level that they should, but we work together. Democrats and Republicans in the House, work with Democrats and Republicans in the Senate, work with the President. We got the transportation bill done. It's going to be good for New York State. It's creating jobs already and will continue to do so. Likewise, Democrats and Republicans work together with the President to pass fair trade agreements The Obama administration says it's going to add $10 billion to our GDP and create 250,000 jobs. Farm Bureau really wanted me to vote for it, and I was proud to do so. The Jobs Act helps small business get access to credit. And veterans, I was with Lyle Decker from Masonville. He's so thankful that we passed that Veteran Jobs Training Bill that's allowing him to go to school, and he's getting a stipend, and he's going to get assistance from unemployment to employment. We got so much further to go, but in fact, we will work together. This country will rise again.
1 minute, Mr. Schreibman.
You know, the fact is, the congressman's voted with his leadership 80% of the time. But the statistics and Washington insider rankings are not what are important. It's the substance. And the fact is, the congressman's record is not bipartisan or moderate any time when it really matters. It's not. That's the record. The fact is, the congressman voted for the Paul Ryan budget. The Paul Ryan budget cuts Pell Grants by $26 billion. Now, I was up at SUNY Delhi, one of our incredible public universities we've got here, watching 3 kids learn about solar panel installation and realizing that 2 out of those 3 kids depend on student aid and wouldn't be there if the congressman's vision for education came to pass. That is not a vision for growth in our future. And we are not going to get our economy back on track when the Tea Party leadership in the House won't bring up the president's job bill, but will vote over and over again to restrict a woman's right to choose, to end Medicare, and slash Pell Grants and Head Start.
1 minute, Mr.
The data you're citing, you need to go to the website, take a look. It's not 80, it's 75. It's the 3rd most independent record in the Congress. Also, if you look up my record, you will see that I work every bill, just about every bill that I put in is a bipartisan bill. And I co-sponsor bipartisan bills. Why? Because I've studied the Constitution, and we've set this thing up that if you don't have consensus, you don't get change. And in an era of divided government, if you believe, as I do, the status quo is unacceptable, then by definition you're going to work together. And we do. And let me say something on budgets. The year before I came into Congress, the deficit was $1.6 trillion, and they had no budget. Why? Because they were incompetent? No, I don't think so. It's because they didn't want to make the hard choices. I have to make choices on budgets. I voted for the Republican budget in 11. I thought it was pro-growth, fiscally responsible, but I had a better choice in 2012. One that would spend money, I think, in better areas for priorities, and one that had better tax reform principles. So I voted for it, and you can feel good because our area is leading the way. Because I think we're actually going to come together to avoid the fiscal cliff by doing something like that.
Thank you. I just would ask you one more time, as we stated at the very beginning, please be respectful of both candidates. We ask you not to shout out and applaud. We're trying to get as much in as we can tonight, and I really appreciate your support for that. Next question will begin with Congressman Gibson. This is for both candidates. Are you concerned about the health risks and potential drinking water contamination caused by the process and chemicals involved in hydraulic fracturing? And how will you protect your constituents from these possible dangers? Again, 2 minutes.
Yes, I am concerned. You know, and I tell you as a guy that has an A rating with the National Federation of Independent Business, an A rating with the Chamber of Commerce, and is always looking for ways that we can grow our economy, but I'm not satisfied that we have a safeguard in place, a regulatory process in place to protect our water and our air. I've co-sponsored the FRAC Act, which basically says, it's a very simple bill, it's 4.5 pages. It says that companies have to disclose chemicals and they have to comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act. Disappointingly, I'm the only Republican on the bill right now, but I believe I can change that. There's some others I can inspire to get on. And look, I mean, this is a country that can do hard things. There's no question on that. But until we have a process where we know that we can safeguard our water and our air, then we would be in a position to empower localities. Localities that could make decisions on whether or not they want to pursue, because you know what? Some localities, they base their economy on tourism. And I've listened carefully to what people have communicated to me. Even if it becomes safe, some of these communities don't want to do it because they're afraid they're going to lose in the pocketbook just because of the drilling and the eyesore. So, look, I mean, I know that this may seem non-related, but I'm the author of a bill that ensures that our Vietnam veterans who served offshore, you know, that they get health coverage for Agent Orange. And why that's related is this. Nobody thought in the 1960s that we were poisoning those servicemen and women, but we were. So we need to learn from history. We need to learn and make sure that we don't rush into this and we end up with our kids and our grandchildren dealing with a situation like Agent Orange, like I'm dealing with cases right now. Because believe me, we don't give up on these sailors that don't get presumed coverage because they didn't step on the ground or go in the river. We don't give up on them. We fight case by case, but it shouldn't be like that. It should be presumed coverage. And I have that bill, and we've got over 100 co-sponsors, bipartisan, by the way, Julian, and we're going to continue to work that. Let me say one other thing with regard to education. I'm the only Republican in upstate New York that has the endorsement of the teachers union. I'm proud to have it.
Mr. Schreibman?
Thanks, Ward. When it comes to fracking, I take the view of a prosecutor, which is what's the evidence? What are the facts? And at this point, the evidence all points to the fact that fracking is not just a risk for our environment, but also a risk for our economy. I've spoken to many small business owners who are worried about lost business if fracking comes to pass. Places like Brewery Omegang out in Cooperstown have talked about leaving if their water's at stake. Spoke to a beef farmer just a couple of days ago whose purchasers have said they won't buy from him and the farmers he works with if there's fracking. So the fact is we have very serious economic consequences to worry about if we choose to go down that route rather than building on our renewables and making farming viable and profitable along with our small businesses in this region. Now, I'm glad that Congressman Gibson has finally come around to co-sponsoring the FRAC Act, something that Congressman Hinchey has championed for a very long time, because it seems as though it should be a pretty straightforward idea that if you want to pump chemicals into the ground, you ought to tell us what you're putting in the ground. There is no reason for that industry to have exemptions from the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts. Now, the fact is the Congressman's expressed concern tonight about the environmental impact. He's thrown some ratings around earlier tonight. You should know that his rating from the League of Conservation voters is 17 out of 100. And he's been labeled by the Sierra Club as one of the 6 worst when it comes to the environment and doing the bidding of the big oil and gas industry. That should certainly concern us when we're making such a consequential decision about whether to take our region in a whole new direction, focused on natural gas rather than focused on our small business and our farmers and our communities here. And I'll say one more thing with respect to the Congressman's record when it comes to energy. Again, he has been driven, I guess apparently till tonight or very recently, about this nuclear plant in upstate New York with a voting record to weaken protections for nuclear safety. That's not the right direction.
Mr. Gibson, 1 minute.
Well, again, on the nuclear power plant, you can just Google and check for yourself, and you'll see. One other thing I'll say on water that concerned me is this happened to be a year that we didn't have enough rain. So, I mean, that's the kind of questions that I asked. When I was a commander, my staff used to always, I asked them these kind of, how do you model this? What happens in a year where we don't get a lot of rain? And, this process relies on so much water. What does that mean for our farmers? What does that mean for our economy all the way across? And I don't have any answers on that. Let me just address these ratings here. Look, they key vote the Keystone Pipeline. And I support it. It's because I remember what it's like to have to pay high gas and home heating for my family. And I know I've got constituents all over that want us at once to drive down gas and home heating and also work towards a better day where we're less reliant. I'm also endorsed by Conserve America. That's a pro-environment group who looks at these things holistically, both the economy and the environment.
Mr. Schreibman, 1 minute.
Sure, I don't have to remember the high cost of gas and home heating oil. I pay it every day. That's the struggles we're going through here. And the fact is we do need a bipartisan approach to our energy future, and we need to appreciate and focus on what's right for this region and these communities that we have here. Our farmers and our small businesses that will be hurt if we go in the wrong direction. And so, when you have a congressman who says that the EPA should only take into account economic impact, which is exactly what you voted for, rather than what the EPA traditionally does, which is look at total impact, that raises serious concerns as we look ahead to evaluating the kind of energy investments we're going to make in this country. When you're voting to reduce nuclear safety, even if you don't want that plant anymore, that you wanted so much before, Congressman, it gives me great concern, and the voters here great concern about the Congressman's attention to safety when it comes to energy exploration.
Next question will begin with Mr. Schreibman, and the question is, what is your position on the Patriot Act? 2 minutes.
You know, the Patriot Act arose out of the horrific attacks of September 11th, 2001. And on that day, I was at work at the Central Intelligence Agency. In fact, my unit chief down the hall pulled the shades up, saying if the next plane is coming here, he wanted to see it coming. And there was a period of time after that when we were absolutely focused on national security issues and ensuring that the folks who were protecting our country had the tools that they needed to do so. But the fact is that what we saw over the course of the next many years were efforts that affected our civil liberties in a negative way. And the important thing that we must always remember is that terrorists can strike us and hurt us. We hope they don't. We hope we take the protections. But it's up to us to ensure that we don't change what makes America great, that we don't undermine our own freedoms, that we don't restrict free speech, that we don't restrict freedom of movement, that folks have an opportunity to be heard, to assemble, and to talk about the issues that are important to them. And unfortunately, our country, if we reacted with an understandable fear, but it's a fear we should not have. And so to me, the Patriot Act had some useful and necessary reforms to help our folks who keep the country safe, but over the past few years has raised serious concerns about our civil liberties that concern me greatly.
Mr. Gibson.
Well, let me just set the record straight here. When he uses being fast and loose, it seems like excessive. But when he says that I'm only including economic impacts, it was to include economic impacts, not to rule anything else out. And to me, that's a pretty commonsensical thing. You want to look holistically before you make decisions. In fact, I think we need more accountability and transparency in the whole rulemaking process. I voted for the REINS Act because part of the frustration my constituents have is bureaucratic agencies propose a new rule, and then and then our constituents feel like they can't even influence it. They can't get at it. What the REINS Act says is any new proposed rule that has $100 million or greater impact on the economy has to first go to the people's representatives for an up or down vote. That makes my job harder. I recognize that, because certainly I'll hear from you, and I should, and I please do. But that way we have accountability and transparency in the process. Look, on the Patriot Act. It was a wise man who once said that a person who will give up his civil liberties, for security deserves neither. And that was Ben Franklin. And he was right then, and he's still right now. And my issue with the Patriot Act, clearly, I spent 29 years in the military. 24 years in the Army, multiple combat tours. I bled for our country in Iraq. But the Patriot Act is unconstitutional. Because here's why, and I want to be specific. The Patriot Act, says that you need to have specificity for roving wiretaps. Unless you don't have it, then a generalized description will work. But here's the problem. If you believe that's important, then we got to change the Constitution. Because the last clause of the Fourth Amendment explicitly states that to get a warrant, you need to have specificity of person, place, or thing. I fought for this country. I put everything on the line for this country, and I'm not going to go down to Washington, D.C. to step on the Constitution.
1 minute, Mr. Schreibman.
Sure. Let's talk about the REINS Act then, since we put it back into this question. Here's what it does. If the EPA proposes a regulation, another agency proposes a regulation under a law that's already been passed, it's within their authority, it goes to Congress, and they have to bring it up for a vote on it. Now let's think about what's happened in Congress the last couple of years. Has much stuff come up? Has there been any progress made? What this does is allow the leadership of the House of Representatives, which hasn't brought the President's Job Act up in the entire time it's been there, to take anything that it wants to and kill it without the light of day. It's not about folks getting more of a say into it. It's creating a process that will debilitate the ability of our government to perform its mission and follow the laws that have been set for them.
Mr. Gibson.
Well, look, I know you mentioned the President's Jobs Act. We took up parts of that. That's part of compromise. I supported parts of this. I was one of the only ones in my party that supported the payroll tax extension for a period of time right before the holidays. You know, and the president asked us to do those trade agreements. I looked at it, Farm Bureau asked me to do it, I was proud to support it. Transportation bill, you know, we support that. I gave you the story on the facts on that earlier. And then the student loan, the president asked for us to keep the student loan rate at 3.4%, and we did that. So we are working together. You just don't get everything. You know, with regard to the RAINS Act, let me just say this. It's $100 million of greater impact on the economy. It has to go to the people's representatives. And let me give you an example. The Farm Bureau now, one of their top issues is not taking the word navigable out of the Clean Water Act because they're concerned about the farmers. Our farmers are concerned about the encroachment that's going to be on their farms. So, you know, I'm looking at this in support of our farmers. I'm proud to have the Friend of the Farmer Award.
Thank you. We will now ask each candidate to deliver a summation of 3 minutes and no more, and we'll begin in the reverse order that we began this evening. So Congressman Gibson will go first.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for everyone to be here. Ward, thanks to the Chamber and to the League as well for the work, and Julian, for your passion, and also for stepping forward. It's not easy to run for office, and I appreciate the vigor with which you debated tonight. And look, I mean, I have fulfilled my pledges. When I retired out of the Army, I said I was going to focus on job creation. I gave you examples of things explicitly that I helped with. The transportation bill. I talked about the fair trade agreements. I talked about the Jobs Act. I talked about the Veterans Training Act. I also talked about the bipartisan budget, which is going to be providing more stability to our environment through tax reform, which we need. I voted for a 1-year extension of the current rates so we could get comprehensive pro-growth tax reform done in that time, because that's what's going to be good for our area. And I'm also focused on the other impediments to growth, because that's what our small business owners and their employees are asking me to look at. Taxes, regulation, healthcare costs, energy costs, looking for ways that we can enhance the profitability of small business so they can recapitalize and hire new workers. At the same time, recognizing that hardworking families spend 96% of their disposable income. So when their income grows, they spend more. And see, that's what we need. And part of the frustration I have in Washington is the parties talk past each other. Republicans tend to focus on supply side, Democrats focus on demand side. It's both. We need to address the supply side so business is ready to grow, but we also need to have demand. So our middle class needs to have that growing income. Look, there is a choice here. If you want more partisanship, I mean, there were moments tonight I felt like I was down in Washington, D.C., not in Katrina. We have to treat each other with dignity and respect. We have to find ways to come together. That bipartisan budget needs serious consideration. And I want to tell you, I'm proud tonight that when I talk about bringing people together, I have evidence of that. I have endorsements that you don't see generally. I mean, we're talking about the NFIB, and we're talking about the building trades. We're talking about the Chamber of Commerce and the teachers' unions. We're talking about the NRA and Serve America. These are examples that I can bring people together. And I want to tell you that I'm looking to bring a local focus here. I'm excited to get an office open up in Kingston. I've had a chance to walk with Mayor Shane Gallo. He's such an impressive guy. I think he's got the right vision for Kingston. He wants to bring the Midtown back. I want to put my headquarters right there to help him. We've had a wonderful conversation, and we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think he's got the right vision for Kingston. I want to work with my kind in the legislature as well, along with all the counties from the area that are in the watershed for fairer treatment. And look, I just want to say one last thing. I know when you watch on the news, you hear all the negativity. Don't believe any of that. This is a great country that can do amazing things. This is the kind of country that produced Rosa Parks, that stood up to racism. One woman can make a difference. This is a country where we put a man on the moon. We can absolutely overcome these challenges we have right now. And on the 6th of November, I'm asking for your vote. Whether you be a Republican, a Democrat, or independent, I'm asking for your support. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Ward. Thank you again to the Chamber, to the League, and to all of you for participating in this debate tonight. This is the core of what makes our democracy work. And I want to start by saying, you know, how similar, when I heard Ward read our two biographies, both even now living just a little bit away from where our moms still live and raising our 3 kids. It's recognizing those shared experiences that's going to be so important to being successful about bipartisanship in Washington, recognizing our shared experiences. Unfortunately, Congressman tonight has repeatedly talked to you about moderation and bipartisanship, but he's just changing his own road sign from Tea Party to moderate. At the end of the day, there's something behind it. It's more than a label. It's a voting record. It's a voting record that he can't go back in time and change. A voting record to end the guarantee of Medicare. A voting record to defund Planned Parenthood. I'm so sorry we didn't talk about women's health care tonight. An issue so important to me and so many people in this community. Voting to defund Planned Parenthood, make it harder for women to get access to critical health services and childhood nutrition. And voting to restrict a woman's right to choose over and over again, even voting this summer to criminalize abortion, even in cases of rape and incest. This is not the agenda of folks in upstate New York. It's not my agenda. We need to focus on our middle-class families, focus on our farmers and our small businesses, focus on our communities and our schools. And again, the Congressman's a nice man, I hope we both are. I will bring a spirit of cooperation, but a spirit of advocacy for those middle-class families and be a champion for them. And I ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you.